Hare Krishna, dear devotees, welcome back once again. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschatade Shatarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So, we are continuing with our series on the glories of Srila Rupa Goswami and his beloved deity, Govindadevi. In our last class, we discussed how after Rupa Goswami's departure, the Rajput kings nicely maintained the seva, the service of Govindaji at sacred Yogapith. Then we mentioned how in 1667, the Muslim tyrant, Aurangzeb, made a black decree, you remember, to destroy all the Hindu schools and temples in his empire at that time. And just yesterday, I discovered another decree he made just for the area of Mathura. I found it in an old document written by one Ishwar Das Nagar. It's described he was a Brahmin from Pakpatan, who happened to be with Aurangzeb while he was visiting Mathura. And this person wrote, quote, "When the imperial army was camping at Mathura, a holy city of the Hindus, the state of affairs with regard to the temples of Mathura was brought to the attention of His Majesty, Emperor Aurangzeb. Thus he ordered the Faujdar of the city, Abdul Nabi Khan, to entirely raze to the ground every temple in the region and construct large mosques over their demolished sites," unquote. So that was just for the Mathura area. And it was a few nights later that Aurangzeb took special aim on Govinda's temple, as we discussed in detail previously, and sent his troops to destroy Govindaji temple and all the other temples in Vrindavan as well. That we described in detail. And we won't repeat. We did go into detail, of course, how the head pujari of the Govinda temple at the time, his name was, well, he's another one of our heroes now, Shivaram Goswami, quickly organized that the deities of Govindaji and Radharani and Vrindadevi be taken quickly out of the temple and hidden in nearby Govinda-kunda, the Govinda-kunda near that Govindadevi temple. Now, what happened next is of great historical significance and utterly fascinating. And by hearing these pastimes that we're going to share with you, we can take great pride in the Vaishnava heroes that we're going to hear about. So, 10 days after the initial attack on the temple, remember that the Mughal warriors, they worked for 2 months on destroying the temple. But 10 days after the initial attack, the deities of Govindaji and Radha and Vrindadevi were secretly taken out from the deep waters of Govinda-kunda by the devotees, you could say, who had survived the slaughter. Now, this was no easy task. For the general in charge of the Mughal army that had actually attacked the temple, he placed night guards. Well, he placed guards everywhere during the day and during the night, hoping to catch any devotees trying to rescue the deities that they had hidden. So how did the devotees accomplish getting, so many huge deities? Govindaji is very big, Radharani's big, and of course, if you've seen Vrindadevi, she's also very big. How did the devotees get them out of Govinda-kunda in the dead of night, with night guards everywhere? Well, Shivaram Goswami, I was reading, he came up with an ingenious idea. He put some cow dung patties in a pot and placed sheep wool on top of them, and then he lit the sheep wool on fire. Now, it wasn't uncommon to see people carrying, burning cow dung patties in those days, because the smoke was a useful way of keeping mosquitoes away. But Shivaram Goswami added something extra to the fire. And what was that? He threw on handfuls of opium powder. Opium powder. Then he covered his mouth and nose with a cloth, and he walked around past the night guards who were standing watch. And the opium smoke immediately put all the guards to sleep. It intoxicated them to the point they fell asleep, all of them. Then, gathering a few strong men, he went to Govinda-kunda and somehow managed to take Govindaji, Radha, and Vrindadevi out from the bottom of the kund. Then the men carefully placed all the deities on a really large bullock cart, which actually I've heard is now somewhere in Jaipur, put away safely. I'd love to have darshan of that bullock cart. But they put all the deities on this large bullock cart. And Shivaram Goswami had also arranged that some devotees retrieve, remember that wooden box with many of the 6 Goswamis' scriptures inside that had been hidden in a field of mud when Aurangzeb's army had attacked Vrindavan. He arranged for them to go get that box, and he also placed that on that bullock cart. So then Goswami covered the deities and the box with a large cloth, and then he put big bunches of dry grass, hay, over the cloth. And then 2 devotees, posing as farmers, got onto the bullock cart. There's a lot of detail I read in the Institute. And a man named Pandey, who would be driving the cart, and his younger brother, who would take care of the deities, they settled into that cart, ready for the journey out to Radha-kunda. That was the first place they took Govindaji and the other deities, was to Radha-kunda. Now, one obstacle they faced, and it was a major one, was that Aurangzeb had declared a lockdown. We all know what a lockdown is now. In Mathura and all the surrounding areas. It meant that all stores and businesses had to close, and no traffic whatsoever was allowed on the roads. Now, why did he do this? He did this to give his soldiers time to search all the houses and the residences and the godowns and the barns, etc., for any deities that had been hidden, as well as to stop devotees from moving those deities to safer locations. And I was reading, he was especially interested in finding Govindaji. So our hero, Shivaram Goswami's idea was to take Govindaji and the other deities to Radha-kunda. Now, why Radha-kunda? We think of Radha-kunda now, actually now it's like a 40-minute drive from Vrindavan. But at that time in history, Radha-kunda was still considered very remote and undeveloped. Of course, Raghunath Das Goswami had previously excavated Radha-kunda, but still it was a very undeveloped area, and there were only a few renounced Gaudiya sadhus living there. At that time they were Babajis. Besides that, the area between Vrindavan and Radha-kunda was just a really dense forest. And the dirt road between Vrindavan and Radha-kunda was practically impassable. I was reading, it was just full of these big potholes. So, anyone who wanted to follow up some idea that maybe the deities were taken to Radha-kunda, they'd probably give up. Who would go out there? Now another factor in the mind of Shivaram Goswami was that there were the Jats and the Gujars. The Jats and the Gujars. They were farmers, but they were also known as very fierce, warrior-like people, who Shivaram Goswami knew would immediately come to the aid of the bullock cart if required. If, some of Aurangzeb's soldiers saw that cart, these Jats and Gujars, they would come. So, Shivaram Goswami, he assigned one local villager to ride a horse 100 meters in front of the bullock cart to warn against any thieves who might be waiting on the path, or again, God forbid, if any of Aurangzeb's soldiers were searching for the deities or trying to, make sure that the lockdown was working, nobody was traveling. So he placed that villager in a horse 100 meters ahead, and he arranged that villager, should he confront any danger, Shivaram Goswami said, you whip your horse, and the screaming of the horse would signal to Pandey and his brother, 100 meters back, of impending danger. 100 meters back. The horse would neigh, and then Pandey and his brother would know, oh, there's some danger coming. So, very carefully, Pandey and his brother, under the cover of darkness, began making their way to Radha-kunda. Now, Vaishnava historians have given further reasons why Shivaram Goswami chose Radha-kunda as the first safe haven for the deities who he envisioned eventually going to Amer, because the Rajput kings, we discussed how many times they're all Krishna bhaktas, and they were facilitating the worship of the deities in Vrindavan. So in Shivaram Goswami's mind, he made a line from Vrindavan to Amer, and Radha-kunda is actually in that direction. So he saw it as Radha-kunda as a safe haven for the deities, their first stop. Because it takes some time for these deities to actually go to, took years actually for them to go to Amer. And another reason is that he knew that the worship of the deities would continue at Radha-kunda. Radha-kunda was considered a place of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And there were Gaudiya Vaishnavas living there, as I mentioned. As we discussed the other day, there were other, and there still are, other Vaishnava sampradayas in Vrindavan, besides the Gaudiyas, besides the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But Radha-kunda was considered the place of the Gaudiyas. Just like, for example, the followers of Vallabhacharya, the Pushtimar, they have their certain places in Braj, especially out at Gokul. And also near Govardhan Hill, we gave a lecture one time on Chandra Sarovara. Chandra Sarovara is a favorite place of the Pushtimar, the Vallabhas. So Radha-kunda and Shyamakunda were seen as a place of the Gaudiyas, first and foremost because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had discovered Radha-kunda and Shyamakunda while visiting Vrindavan. And then later on, Jiva Goswami had purchased much of the land there. And of course, our great Acharya, Raghunath Das Goswami, spent many decades doing bhajan out there. So Shivaram Goswami knew that the Gaudiya Babajis out at Radha-kunda, they would continue with the worship of the deities. This was on his mind. Not only that we move them safely, but the puja goes on. This is deity worship. I was remembering that when I was reading this, that Prabhupada said one time that once you start the worship of the Shalagram Shila, it should never stop. He was giving some instruction to a devotee who had a Shalagram. He said, once you begin the worship, it must go on every day, irregardless. So Shivaram Goswami was thinking not only moving the deities, but continuing the puja. This is a pujari. This is a Vaishnava devotee. Ironically, also the worship of the deities out at Radha-kunda, it would be made safer because, well, ironically again, all the deities' valuable paraphernalia that had been gifted by the Rajput kings, all the gold and silver and jewels, unfortunately had been stolen by Aurangzeb's soldiers. So no jewels meant no extra attention. So once again, Govindaji would be worshipped in a simple way, like Sri Rupa Goswami had first worshipped him when he was first discovered at Yogapith. You may remember we described some of the details of how Rupa Goswami, when he began the puja, practically the same day he discovered Govindaji, he started the puja. Sometimes devotees, they ask me, what's the most important rule or regulation in deity worship? There's so many rules. I always say the most important rule in deity worship is to always remember the deity is a person. Always remember the deity is a person. And then all the other rules and regulations fall in place. So here's Govindaji, and he's being, secretly moved from Vrindavan proper out to Radha-kunda. He needs he needs to take rest, he needs to wake up in the morning. He's a person, he's the supreme person. He needs his bath, he needs to be dressed, and he needs to be fed. So the Shivaram Goswami and all the devotees understood this. So, of course, the worship was going to be different. It was going to be like Rupa Goswami started the worship. You remember how he would, we described how Rupa Goswami would decorate Govindaji with prakritika parivesh. Prakritika parivesh, which means shringar, or ornaments, made by nature, like creepers and flower dresses and gunja berry garlands and Vaijayanti flower beads and tulsi leaf garlands, etc. Remember? And how Rupa Goswami would also place a water pot, a simple water pot near Govindaji, as well as a stick from a kadamba tree and a mukut, or a crown made of tulsi beads. Simple, but of course offered with pure devotion, the most important element. Now, to further ensure the safety and protection of the deities going out to Radha-kunda, Shivaram Goswami did something which I thought was really amazing. He went out to that area where he already had many admirers and followers in the Jat and Gujar families, and he gave many of them diksha, or initiation, because he knew that, like the Vaishnavas who had stood up to the soldiers coming to destroy Govindaji's temple, who, as you remember, had actually sacrificed their lives defending the Lord, defending the deity. These Jat and Gujar men and women who became his disciples would do the same for Govindaji if required at Radha-kunda. So he went out there and he gave them diksha, he gave them initiation, which definitely increases one's shraddha, one's faith, one's guru nishta, faith in the guru and his mission. So, this would make a great movie, wouldn't it? The real movie, the most important movie of all time. So slowly, the cart of Govindaji moved from Vrindavan to Radha-kunda, fortunately without incidents. Where, when it arrived at Radha-kunda, it was met by some Jat and Gujar farmers weapons in hand. And a lot of details actually given. The cart actually stopped first next to the sacred Bhajan Kutir and Samadhi Mandir of Raghunath Das Goswami, where the few devotees living at Radha-kunda had already made arrangements for receiving Govindaji. Of course, everything's, top secret. But the puja goes on. The puja goes on, no matter what. And those Gaudiyas, they were Babajis, they were renunciates. They took these deities, big deities, out of the cart, and they placed them under a large banyan tree. Previously, Govindaji and Radha and Vrinda, they had this magnificent temple, golden utensils and opulent worship, and now they're standing under a banyan tree. And those Gaudiya Babajis, they first offered the deities a preparation called Shram Bhoga, S-H-R-A-M, Shram Bhoga. Now the term Shram Bhoga refers to a specific Bhoga offering which the older gopis would offer to Krishna at Nandagram when he came back from herding cows in Vrindavan in the late afternoon. Now in Shastra I found it in the Vrindavan Research Institute, which is turning out to be a big blessing for all of us. I found there in the Institute, it's written, quote, Shram means hard work, and Bhoga means food offering. So Shram Bhoga means an offering of cooling food particles that release the stress of the Lord, which is caused by his intense efforts during his pastimes, unquote. So the devotees at Radha-kunda offered Shram Bhoga to Govindaji and Sri Radha and Vrindadevi, thinking that they must have felt stressed from the difficult journey from Vrindavan to Radha-kunda. How personal. The same preparation that was offered 5,000 years ago to Krishna when he came back from the fields and a little tired. Shram Bhoga. So we should bear in mind, again, that this was the first time in almost 79 years that there was no gold plates, gold paraphernalia for the offering. All the paraphernalia that they used that day, I was reading, was made from clay, lovingly made by the Babajis while the deities made their perilous journey that night. Word got out there, they immediately went to work, and they took the mud of Radha-kunda and they fashioned plates and cups and all types of paraphernalia for the worship of the deities. And from that day on, throughout the many years it took the deities to reach their ultimate destination, which was Jayapur, the puja was done as it had been since the time of Rupa Goswami. Of course, without all the gold. But the same worship, the rituals went on. So how was that possible to keep such dedicated worship? It was possible because all those many devotees loved Govindaji. You could say that is the fruit of deity worship. It's the purpose of deity worship, like any other activity we do in Krishna consciousness, to awaken one's love for Krishna. I came across a beautiful letter in that regard that Srila Prabhupada wrote to my godbrother Vasudev Das on March 6, 1970. And I quote, my beloved spiritual master, I am also very pleased to learn that the deities are now receiving proper service and you are developing a great love for them. Please continue your sincere service with even greater vigor and your love will grow increasingly more. Actually, when this dormant love for Krishna is aroused in the heart of a devotee, there are for him no more problems in life. So continue to chant regularly Hare Krishna and be happy. Your nice service attitude is most encouraging to me. So there it is. By worshiping the deity, the Archa-vigraha form of the Lord, because Krishna is present in that form. He's not different than the deity. My dear Lord, you are not a statue, the young Brahmin said. You are directly the son of Maharaj Nanda. So one's love will develop. So all these devotees who, we can't even describe or know how many devotees served Govindaji through the centuries. Their love was expressed in their dedicated, regular service to the deity. So despite the catastrophic situation in Vrindavan at that time, the worship of Radha Govinda and Vrindadevi went on as always, but for the time being with clay plates. I'm just so impressed by all those devotees. I offer them my obeisances thousands and thousands of times. It encourages me in my deity worship. And I'm sure it also encourages all of you. Deity worship is a unique gift that Srila Prabhupada gave to the Western world. Of course, at that time, only a very few devotees carried on that worship in secret. No bells were heard ringing from the seva of Govindaji. No big kirtans were there in front of him. His worship was done in absolute secrecy and strict confidence. I actually read that even the residents of the nearby villages around Radha-kunda, they never knew that Govindaji was being worshipped at Radha-kunda. That's how, tight the secret was, and that says something. There were devotees who knew this was going on, obviously. Those devotees who hid the deities, those devotees who took the deities out of the kund, who helped arrange for the bullock cart, and the sadhus out at Radha-kunda, a number of devotees. But the secret was kept because of their devotion. There's that common saying in the material world, if 3 people share a secret, that secret can only remain if 2 of them are dead. Can only keep that secret if 2 of them are dead. But here we see the Vaishnavas, mum's the word, tight-lipped for Govindaji. So that being the case, only a few devotees kept this secret. We can hardly imagine the feelings of separation that the Brajabasis in the greater Vaishnava community were feeling in the absence of Govindaji. They didn't know where he was, if he'd even been rescued, or that he was on his way to Jayapur, to the kingdom of Jai Singh II, another one of our heroes. We'll hear more about him later. He actually had a dream, I was reading, that Govindaji was on his way, and he was cooperating with Shivaram Goswami to take the deities on that journey. I'd love to be part of that pastime. So, but what were the general devotees feeling when Govindaji had left? He was their life and soul. Actually, historians have noted that Govindaji's leaving Vrindavan, beginning with the move to Radha-kunda, and then many other villages along the way, which we'll describe in further lectures on the way to Jaipur, his leaving Vrindavan had the same effect on the people of Vrindavan at that time as it did on the Brajabasis when Akrura took Krishna and Balaram out of Vrindavan on a chariot bound for Mathura 5,000 years ago. Had the same effect. When Govindaji left, it had the same effect on the Brajabasis as did the Brajabasis feeling Krishna's separation when Akrura took him to Mathura. For the Brajabasis living in Vrindavan in 1667, Govindaji was the be-all and end-all of their existence. And his magnificent temple always stood for them as a testament to the love and devotion that their beloved Rupa Goswami had for Govindaji. And all of a sudden, it was torn away from them. You can imagine how they cried oceans of tears. Actually, how to understand the feelings of the people of Vrindavan during those fateful days in 1667? Well, I thought we can study the hearts of the Brajabasis who lost Krishna 5,000 years ago in Vrindavan. The feelings, the sentiments of both parties were the same. There's that axiom, quote, "Two things equal to one thing are equal to each other." Two things equal to one thing are equal to each other. So the feelings of the Brajabasis 5,000 years ago when Krishna left, and the feelings of the Brajabasis when Krishna left as Govindaji in 1667, they're the same. So let's take a moment to try and understand the feelings of the residents of Vrindavan when Krishna left in order to get a better understanding of the feelings of the Brajabasis when Govinda left. And how to do that? Well, an old friend of mine, a genuine Gaudiya Vaishnav saint, he was a close friend of mine. His name was Fakir Mohan Prabhu. He passed away a few years ago. Whenever I would meet him, he would sing a very beautiful Aryan bhajan, because he was from Orissa. He would sing a very beautiful Aryan bhajan, composed by a Vaishnav poet in medieval times. The devotee's name was Bhakta Charan Das, and the poem is called Mathura Mangala. It's actually hundreds and hundreds of verses. But I thought today we could conclude with a few of those verses so we understand what is separation from Krishna. So I'm going to recite these verses for you as a conclusion to our class. We can think of those devotees in 1667 and just, we can feel their hearts. We can feel their separation and pray that one day we can also have the same sentiments for Govindaji, for Krishna. So here's the poem of Bhakta Charan Das, his Mathura Mangala. Staring at Govinda's lotus face, the gopis said, "O Mohan, now that you are leaving for Mathura, who in your absence will look after us? Your departure will mean our death. Do we need to live any longer now that our only support, Mohan, is leaving for Kamsapura? Better kill us by poison and live in peace there. Your absence for a moment bears heavily on us, let alone 2 or 4 days. When you went to the Vrindavan forest, leading the cattle along, in the company of your cowherd friends, we used to wait anxiously for your return. Seeing you coming back, we regained our lives, as lilies bloom cheerfully when the moon shines. We would be filled with joy, as is a lotus at the sight of the sun, or a blind man getting back his eyesight, or a poor man upon finding a gem. Perturbed to see Krishna departing, the fish-eyed gopis, oblivious of the presence of respectable elders, cried out, "O Krishna, what provokes you to kill us so mercilessly? We are not putanas of Gokula. With none to protect us, O Krishna, you will see with your own eyes how by taking poison we will kill ourselves. Let the 14 worlds know we lost our lives as Krishna deserted us. He did not kill us himself, but his departure from Gokul caused our death. O Krishna, you will be guilty of killing the ones you have sheltered. Have you forgotten how many times you saved us from peril On the eve of your departure, you are taking those lives you have saved. Oh Krishna, it's not fair. You are not the same Govinda, as benevolent as before. Hare Krishna. So these were the feelings of both the Brajavasis 5,000 years ago and in 1667 when Krishna left Vrindavan. So we'll continue the journey along with Govindaji in a couple of days. We'll explain a little bit more about his pastimes at Radha-kunda and then his next journey to Kamyavan. So please be patient for a couple more days. Thank you, Prabhu, so much. This is just pure nectar. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shamasundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari, Shrimati Radharani ki, Shri Rupa Goswami Prabhupada ki, 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan ki, Shri Shri Radha Govindaji ki, Vrindadevi ki, Yogamaya ki, Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Mayapur Dham ki, Shri Krishna Sankirtan Yagya ki, back home, back to Godhead ki, Gauda Premanandi, Jai Jai Sisi Radhe, Sham Jai Vrindavan Dham ki, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki, Hare Krishna.